What's up, Photoshop fam? I'm Rick Navarro, and this is the Pixel Laundry Photoshop Academy. Now, what if you're doing something that you repeat often and you have like a very preset, determined amount of steps or functions that you have to do over and over and over again? Let's say you're batch processing 100 images. Well, you'd have to go in each time, create that adjustment layer, put the specific settings that you want for that adjustment layer, and then do your workflow, right? Well, there's a faster way. What you can do is create your own preset and apply that. So right here, I've got one here that I use all the time. It's called Skin in BG, or Background Check. This is a preset that I have created specifically for my workflow, which happens to deal with a lot of retouching. So the reason I use this crazy looking color is that it allows me to see things that you can't otherwise with the naked eye. For example, all of these dust spots that are coming from sensor dust. If I take off this curves layer, you can see some of them, but you can't see all of them. And if I want to get rid of all of them, I would use this particular preset. So how do you make a preset? Well, let's show you. I'm gonna go in here and create a curves adjustment layer. And I'm gonna manipulate my curves here. I'm just basically plotting points on here. And again, this allows me to see better than I would with the naked eye or on a raw image. So what I'm going to go to is this little drop down right here that says Save Curves Preset. So if I go save, I can title this Curves Sample, and it's going to save it inside of the Photoshop predetermined folders or the application folders that allow you to source your images or source your workflow that's custom for you. All right, so if I save that, now in my preset, I've got curves sample. So if it comes in at default, I can quickly go to my curve sample, and there it is. I don't have to recreate and plot those points every single time. And that's how you make an adjustment preset. You also have this function in several of the other adjustment layers, and it works exactly the same way. Okay, if you want to delete your adjustment layer for some reason, you just, something messed up, or you don't like it, or you want to start over, or you want to try a different adjustment layer, all you have to do is grab the layer and drag it over to this little trash can here in your layers palette, or you can click on it and hit delete, and that's how you get rid of your adjustment layer. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about these specific adjustment layers and what they do and how they work, okay? So some of the most common adjustment layers you're going to use are something like levels. Levels has to do with tonal adjustment, the tonal levels that are being displayed in the image. This dark cursor right here in the properties represents the dark tones. This gray one represents your midtones, and this light one represents your highlights or your light tones. If I want to bring up those specific areas, I just grab on those specific cursors and slide them over. So let's say this one, if I look at this entire image, it's a little flat. If I wanted a little bit more contrast, let me go ahead and slide over these darker tones, and then I'm going to bring this up in the highlights. And if I'm getting any of the colors that are clipping or crushing, I may bring up this midtone slider just a little bit. Now again, this is applying globally, so I want to clip it down to just the girl. So now this is a before and an after, and now she's a little bit more poppy, a little bit more bright, a little bit more contrasty, and that's how levels adjustments work. Now this one down here is your white and your black point, and if you ever need to adjust them, you can use them, but I would recommend using them sparingly depending on what you're doing, and especially in the beginning as you're more a novice and less of an advanced user. These are going to bring your white point and your black points down. Your white points and your black points tend to be more of exposure adjustments than anything else. They're not going to grab onto the individual tonality of the image. For example, like if I grab the sliders up here that are dealing with the high, mids, and lows, they're going to take into consideration the actual lights, mids, and lows of the garment. Let me push this in exaggeration so you can see what I'm saying. So if I grab all these darks, it's going to really grab these areas that are dark and push them further. Same thing with the light. If I grab these lights, it's really going to go into into the light areas and manipulate specifically those pixels. Whereas my white and black points are kind of global adjustments, and they're not going to take that into consideration. They're just basically going to either whiten out or darken out the image. Okay. So, and please notice that it's working kind of in opposite. So if I grab my white point and bring it down, it's going to get darker. Whereas if I grab my highlight slider, it's going to grab the highlights and bring them up, not down. You also have in this adjustment layer, you also have this button right here that is an auto button. And what the auto button does is it allows the computer or the program to think for you and to basically make a guess as to what it thinks is the best adjustment based off of its own internal algorithms and processes. So if I just hit auto, it makes adjustments for me. Now, this one has been pretty evenly exposed, so you can't really see too much of a difference. But if you'll notice that it did actually make an adjustment, it's very, very slight. You can see it really well here in the face, but it's not very much. Now, let's say for some reason I've messed up and I've gotten way in here, and this is a simple one to kind of reset. But if I wanted to just reset it back to the beginning, if I hit this button right here, it's going to reset to adjustment defaults, which basically means a brand new adjustment layer. If I go to this one, it's going to go to the previous state. So much like a history or an undo, a history state or an undo, it's just going to go back or allow you to see what the previous setting was. Okay. If I hit this one, it resets it back to the previous. If I go back one more, it goes all the way back to the beginning. This eye, it turns it on and off. Same thing is happening right here. If I use this little eye, that is the visibility of the layer. So I can turn it on or turn it off. Trash can, just like the trash can down here, if I delete it, it's going to ask me if I want to delete the levels. And I can delete it from there, or I can grab it from here and drag it into the trash can as well. And that's how you delete your adjustment layer. Let's look at this image real quick and make some adjustments based off of the things that we've just learned. So that previous image was a little bit more evenly exposed. This one is a little bit under, a little bit darker. And there's a bit of a color cast in the background, if you'll notice. So based off of what we've just learned as far as adjustment layers, I'm going to make some adjustments here so you can see the workflow. As I mentioned before, I've already made a selection just for the sake of time. This is what the selection looks like. It's a little rough, needs a little bit of refining, but this image also has a fall off in the depth of field. So some of the texture in the hair and the shoulder is a little blurry. So we're not too concerned about that. And I'll show you how to adjust that in your adjustment layer to make a soft transition from the original image to your adjustment layer. I've created that selection. And I am going to make a selection by holding down the command and clicking on the layer itself. I believe in the PC, if you hold down Control, you'll get this little indication over the layer where there's a hand and now a selection box that shows up. If you click on that, that will create the selection for you. Now I want to make sure, based off of this selection, I'm going to create an adjustment layer. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to invert that selection. So right now I have her selected. I want to select everything but her. And the way I do that is I hold down Command, hit Shift, and hit I for invert. And it's going to take that selection and flip it outwards. You can also do that here under the Select menu set. You can also do that here in the Select menu set by hitting Select and Inverse. And here it is the hotkey. And if you're on a PC, it will give you your hotkey for this option as well. So again, Command, Shift, and I will give me that on my Mac, and I have inverted my selection. Now I'm going to create an adjustment layer that is only going to affect the background. So let's grab a hue sat layer to play with some of these colors, okay? Because there's a little bit of a yellow color cast, and I want to get rid of that. So again, there are presets here that will automatically adjust that if I want this style of preset, or if I go back to default, I can create a preset. But what I want to do is grab that specific color range. So if I grab this little slider here, if I click, an eyedropper is going to come up and an adjustment down here in this color wheel is going to be made. If I take this, it says that that yellowish color is actually more red. So if I want to shift that color, to, let's say, a green or a purple, or I want to desaturate it completely and maybe brighten it up so it looks like she's against a white wall, that's going to grab all of those colors inside of that mask. Now, if you look down here in the mask, you see how this black shape here is the part that is concealed. This is the part that the effect is not being applied to. So it's being applied completely all the way around. If I hold down Alt Option and click inside the mask, I'll get a black and white representation, which is actually the mask of how this is being applied. If I wanted to make adjustments here, I could with my brush tool and making sure that I'm selected on the white box. You can see these little perimeter. They're not arrows. They're just kind of like another box. But if I click off of it, you'll see that I can actually select it. Let me go back in there. And if I needed to make adjustments to this mask, I could. If I needed to take rid of that, I could do that. Or if I needed to add more, I could. That's where you can edit that mask specifically. But now that mask is being applied, and because I've created a relatively tight mask around each of these hairs, my mask is pretty good. So that color is only being applied towards the outside. Now let's say I wanted to add a little bit more contrast to her face. Let's just go make a selection to her face. So I've added a curves layer here. I'm going to pull it up a little bit and maybe drop down in the lows just a little bit. Curves are another amazing tool. They will break up your individual into the channels. If you'll notice that you've got a red, green, and a blue channel, you also in your channels have a red, green, and blue channel. The RGB is the combination of those three channels together. Whenever you're looking at anything on screen, whether it's phone, computer, your television, anything made up of a digital display is made up of light. And the three colors that are being combined in different combinations to create variations of color are red, green, and blue. Whenever you're printing, however, your image is being made up of ink. So images that are RGB or red, green, and blue have to be converted to CMYK, which stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And the combinations of those colors make a different color on print or on paper. We'll talk more about that in another lesson, but just so that you know the difference and why you're seeing RGB channels here. If you go into your image menu set, you'll notice that the mode that this particular image is in is RGB, which is red, green, and blue. If I was going to print this, I would want to make sure that this was in CMYK first before I made any adjustments so that I can have a proper visual representation of what it should be looking like when I print it. I can make adjustments in these individual channels and they will give me various effects. If you'll notice that this mask is inverted from this mask. Everything that's black is white in this one, and everything that is white is black. So I have now inverted my mask to not apply to the outside, but to apply directly to the face. And that's why you see that this adjustment is applying only to the face. Now, look at this. If you'll notice, you've got this very hard edge here, right? And well, that doesn't work. So how do we fix that? Well, you can fix that in one of two ways. First off, because it's a mask, as I mentioned before, it's paintable. So if I go into the mask, again, hold down Alt or Option or Control and click on the mask itself, and it will give you the black and white representation. Then I'm going to grab a brush and I'm going to make a very soft edge with my brush. And with that brush, I'm going to paint very softly around that edge so there isn't such a hard edge. This might be easier done with the actual image showing so that you can see where the effect is being applied and not being applied. And I can very quickly paint around this edge so it's applying to that shadow on her cheek and not necessarily on the hair. Okay, but again, that's a bit painstaking, right? So what if, is there a faster way? Yes, there is. So let's go back a few steps in the history palette. In every single one of these adjustment layers, there's a mask. So if you'll notice here in the upper left-hand corner of the properties palette, there is the button that represents what the adjustment layer is, and then there is a mask. There's a mask button. This is true in almost every single one. If I go to my curves and I click on this mask, I get a couple different options. This first option is density, and the density basically is how solid that black and white layer is. Right now, it's 100% white, 100% black. If I slide this down, you'll notice that the black is starting to fade to gray, and that's kind of a mid-tone or a medium, or it's how dense that color is being represented. If I slide it all the way, it's going to go to pure white. It's almost like it's not there. Okay, so that's what density does. Now, if I feather this edge, it's going to blur that entire edge for me. And depending on how hard I go, now my mask is getting a nice, soft, gradated edge all the way to the outside of the mask. Now, how does that look once I apply it? Again, if I want to see it in kind of real time, I'm going to work on the picture here. And let's pull it all the way down. Take a look right here and what's happening as I feather it out. Now I get a smooth transition from the color all the way out to the hair. Now it's still a little bit too much on the hair, and this is where I can now paint off. So I'm gonna make sure I'm on the proper mask, and I'm gonna grab my brush tool and slowly graduate with a paintbrush. So in conjunction with the feathering and my paintbrush, now I can move relatively quickly instead of being worried about having a super, super tight edge. Now, if I want to go back and make adjustments, I can click out of the mask, come back here, and make my adjustments as I see fit. And I can pull it up and I can pull it down. I can add points in here for different visual effects. And I can also save this look as a preset, as we mentioned before. So again, go to your menu right here, go to Save Curves Preset. You'll be able to label that as something that you can save and reference later. All right, guys, that's adjustment layers. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope that really helps you out. Stick around for this series. We're giving away a ton of information, especially if you're new or you're a novice in Photoshop. Maybe you aren't, maybe you've been using it for a while and you're just looking for maybe a further kind of in-depth look at how to use Photoshop. We are doing an entire series on basic Photoshop 101 stuff. That's all we got for you today. That's lesson 3 of Photoshop 101. Thank you so much for watching. We really hope that helps you out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you can be updated whenever we put out another lesson. And until next time, create every day. We'll talk to you soon, Photoshop fam. Bye-bye.